Good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to what may be your first webinar of 2022, the first of many, I suspect, as we continue in a mostly virtual world. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes, actually less than a minute, as I welcome an amazing panel with an incredible amount of content to talk about together. So we want to jump right in. I'm just going to give it a minute as people are dialing in. But maybe we will. Let's see. Oh yeah, it's fabulous. Welcome everybody. Again, if you're just joining, I'm Mitchell Warren, the director of AVAC, and delighted to welcome 4 dear friends and colleagues to have a conversation with all of us about any number of issues. As we were talking and preparing for the call, we realized the list goes on and on of topics, both in HIV and broadly in global health, that we all need to be thinking about as we enter this new year. And we're really excited to have this panel to really help frame for all of us both what's the latest in science and policy and advocacy, and hopefully in the course of the next hour to chart together a path of what that advocacy looks like for all of us around the world in both grappling with HIV, but also broader issues of health equity. I'm going to introduce 4 great people in just a minute. I'm going to do a bit of a framing minute or two of introduction about what the last 6 weeks have looked like for a lot of us. And then we'll dive into a conversation. We have some great questions and topics that many of you shared with us when you registered for the call. Please do feel free to continue to add things to the chat, the Q&A. Hopefully we'll get to raised hands. This is a conversation that really doesn't have an end. It really, an hour from now, we'll have more of a comma because it will continue. I also want to thank everybody. I realize it's the start of the new year, one that ideally we're all entering into somewhat rested and rejuvenated, but also I know all of us are somewhat still exhausted from a holiday that got punctuated badly by waves of the COVID pandemic in each of our countries and communities in different ways. And I really want to acknowledge that and thank you for making the time to join this call. I am joined by, as I say, 4 great friends and colleagues. We wanted to give really different perspectives of where the world is right now in both science and advocacy. And I'm delighted, you'll meet them each in a minute, to have Rachel Bagley from the World Health Organization, Kenneth Mohange, who very importantly on January 1st celebrated his elevation to be the executive director of the Coalition for Health Promotion and Social Development, HEPS, based in Uganda, a longtime partner, and I will say a past AVAC fellow. Also a past AVAC fellow, Grace Kumwenda from Malawi, from Pakichere, who's been a remarkable advocate for both research and rollout in Malawi and in the region. And of course, Linda Gale Becker, who leads the Desmond Tutu Health Foundation in Cape Town, and has inspired, I think, when I look at the list of who's on the line, I think every one of us can say, as I think Jim Pickett once said, she and Beyonce may be the only people who just need a single name, LGB. So we're going to get to the 4 of them in just a minute. I'm going to just quickly share a screen because as we prepared for this webinar, we realized even in the midst of, we thought it was kind of a hectic year in 2021, and it was, and we thought, it was time for a break. And around World AIDS Day, we put out a new vision of our work at AVAC and laid out a plan for the next 5 years. And one of the things that we put in that piece, and something that we'll talk a lot about on this call, is that there is remarkable science happening, whether that's COVID vaccines, whether that's injectable cabotegravir, you name it, the science is remarkable. But even that science is no match if we have poor health systems, if we have bad communication, if we have persistent vaccine nationalism and health inequity. We all know that, and we didn't need a new pandemic to teach us that, but that's the challenge for all of us as we go forward. But in that document on World AIDS Day, we put out, and many of you know, we do these timelines all the time, and this looked so exciting with the vaginal ring being approved in, at least in Zimbabwe, and moving forward in a number of countries. and all the other products you see in that timeline. And that was on World AIDS Day, December 1st, just 6 weeks ago. And in the intervening 6 weeks, it's amazing how much happens. Oh, there we go. Here's just in 6 months, and I'll just quickly frame it, and we'll talk about this with the panel. But many of you will know that just before Christmas, on December 20th, the FDA approved cabotegravir for PrEP in the United States, raising both incredible opportunity, but also remarkable challenges. Also really important to note that while the FDA approved it, ViiV has submitted the dossier for the product in at least 7 other countries, including Malawi and South Africa and Kenya and Botswana. Really important, and an opportunity that hopefully we'll all get to seize together. But you'll also notice that nothing about, and we all know this, nothing about HIV prevention research is easy or straightforward. And while we were very, and still are very excited about the prospect of a 6th monthly injectable in lenacapavir, the possibility of oral FTAF in cisgender women, and once a month oral islatravir, all in large clinical trials that began in the midst of COVID, all were put on pause in the final weeks of the year for very different reasons. But we want to talk to the panel a bit about that. What does this mean for next generation PrEP? Because I think all of us on the line will know fundamentally that for all the excitement of oral PrEP, of the vaginal ring, of cabotegravir, and of next generation PrEP, without future products, without a vaccine, without antibodies, we won't have a truly comprehensive response to this epidemic. And that's really, and that's just what's happened in the last 6 weeks. Who knows what's going to happen in the next 6 weeks, but hopefully our 4 panelists will give us some insights there. And just to say, although we are looking at products, I think for us at AVAC and on this panel, it's never just the biomedical. And again, we didn't need COVID to tell us it, but it reminded us that biomedical interventions that are delinked from behavioral and structural interventions will never have any impact. And we want to probe that and what lessons we might learn from the current environment. And finally, just to say, my slide is slow this morning, is that there are 5 priorities that we'll talk a bit about on this call and throughout the year: delivering what we've got, developing and updating our research agendas based on all the rich results and some disappointing results that came in the last year. How do we center communities in the response? What does the future of prevention architecture need to look like? And perhaps most importantly for the long term, how do we embed the AIDS response into future global health security and pandemic preparedness? So that's a whirlwind of where the last several weeks had us landing at AVAC, and really, again, delighted to welcome Rachel and Ken, Grace and Linda Gill into a conversation about it and their thinking. And we thought we might start, and I'll just maybe move around my screen. So Rachel, you're conveniently at the top, to ask each of you just to, as you kind of re-enter the year, hopefully after some holiday, as you re-enter the year, what is kind of on your mind, top priority, top challenge as you kind of face the next 12 months or so?
I'm usually a sort of half glass full person, and these past couple of years for WHO and for all of us have been really, really tough with COVID. And we're now experiencing this big wave. And Linda Gale, we were just chatting beforehand, you know, they've come out of that in South Africa. They're looking forward now to hopefully an easier time. So we hope that will be the case for the whole world. I mean, of course, we're still very saddened by the inequity in access to vaccines, inequity in access to testing. But, you know, I think we really need to push on and make much more waves for this. And that will apply similarly to prevention. As Mitchell has said, you know, we've got exciting new prevention options, but I do worry that these will be slow. We've been slow in the past, but we need to continue to really push for prevention alongside maintaining our HIV services for people with HIV.
Great, Rachel, thank you. And we're going to come back to a bunch of those issues that you kind of provided some seeds to build on. Ken, as I said, congratulations, the new executive director of HEPS in Uganda. What's on your mind as you not only enter the year, but enter your new position?
Thank you so much, Mitchell, and hi, everyone. I'm excited about my new position, though also a bit anxious, given that it's a new role for me, but a great way to start the year. And happy to be here. Also, to resonate with what Rachel said, I'm also a bit concerned, and this is an experience from COVID, where we had vaccines out on the market, but from where I am, access and even COVID being a global pandemic, unequitable access to vaccines, it many times cuts short that excitement about Tegrova. And that's my concern. I'm excited about it, but in terms of access and the experience we've had, I'm a little concerned. And what's really on my mind is the full recovery from the disruptions COVID has caused in the public health response system. And to be specific to HIV prevention, these were some of the services that were regarded as non-essential and were halted. So to me, it's how we respond to getting back fully to our prevention programs and getting back on track on some programs, like from where I am, like circumcision, which was on track, but was so much affected. How do we get back on track on such, but also products like oral prep, which were beginning to take shape, but went back. So that's what is on my mind. And over to you, Chair.
Great, Ken, thank you so much. And I'm so glad you brought in circumcision, one of the most powerful prevention options we have. And of all of the interventions, one that actually was most debilitated by COVID. How do we get it back on track? I'm so glad you mentioned that. Grace, sitting in what looks like a beautiful warm spot in Malawi, what's on your mind?
Thank you so much, Michelle, and hi, everyone. So sitting in Malawi, first of all, I would like to say we are excited with some of the developments that are happening, as you rightly said. Just to think of the fact that women in Malawi and elsewhere will potentially have the Pavin ring in the mix, will potentially have CAB-LA in the mix. I think it excites us. We've talked about options for a long time, and being in this space in 2022 saying, we are almost there. I think we are excited about that. But whilst the excitement is there, we are concerned. And I think personally, I'm also concerned. Some of the issues have already been talked about by Kenneth. But I think for me, it's thinking about this conversation around putting communities at the center. How will this look like as we start introducing the new products? Yeah. I think I'm somebody who has always said, oftentimes we talk a lot about it, but when it comes to time where now the communities need to be engaged and need to be at the center, sometimes we do not get to do it enough. So I think I'm a bit more anxious, not too much concerned, but anxious to see how that process will look like in terms of community engagement. The second thing that is on my mind that I keep on thinking about is how do we make sure that oral prep proven, it's already there, and most countries are already implementing, scale up. I think the intervention is there, but I feel like they are in some aspects, some policies, some bottlenecks that are preventing us to get where we need to get to. So I think at country level, we need to be looking at these issues and make sure that we are scaling up the interventions that are there. So that for me is also a bit of a concern that I have from where I'm sitting. Thank you so much. Over to you, Mitch.
Beautiful, Grace. Thank you so much. LGB, the Southern Tip, what's on your mind?
Thanks, Mitchell, and Happy New Year to everyone. It's so nice to make contact with everyone. So thanks for arranging this early on in the year. I am just hugely excited. So the first piece is that I think what the last 18, 24 months has taught me, and I hope it's resonating around the world, is prevention is better than cure, right? And so this is the right conversation to be having. And, we need to remind everyone again in HIV that as well as the fact that we really believe treatment for all and effective, efficient treatment for all is also prevention. We also need to be really advocating for primary prevention. Like Kenneth, I don't want to forget the other aspect. And I've made a personal promise that I'm not going to go onto a single panel without mentioning that we have not eradicated prevention in children as yet. And this is something that I believe we really need to get a grip on. So I'm going to say that and then move on, because I think most of this is around biomedical prevention and what the options are coming down the pike. So when it comes to PrEP, which is this wonderful, magical, fantastic gift that has been given us, pretty much like COVID vaccines, which I am eternally grateful for. I have three things that are on my mind at the moment. The one is a bird in the hand. So we have to do something about getting this thing that we already have. And instead of wringing our hands and wishing we had something better and whatever, we really need to get oral PrEP out now because we have it, we can use it. It works very, very well in all populations when deployed correctly. And if we're not deploying it properly, then we need to get that right. So that's the first one. The second one is prepare for what's coming down the pike. It is so fantastic that we have these wonderful, wonderful new options. And beyond that, even more exciting options. And I just want to say at this point, we've always had potholes and we've always navigated potholes. Us in Africa, we know how to deal with potholes. You either drive over them or you drive around them, but you never stop going down that road simply because there was a pothole. So that's the next thing, is that we really need to prepare. And I can't agree more with my fellow panelists that this is an area that needs urgency and, effective movement and mobilization that is organized and systematic to do this. And then thirdly, this is not going to happen by us talking on these panels, unfortunately. So what we have to say is, what is the advocacy to get access to these next things? And what is each of our tasks? So it might be that you are, and I'm talking to folk, my comrades like Yvette, who I know can toy brilliantly. Maybe there's a role to toy. For somebody else, it might be you need to pick up your congressman or your senator or your whatever to say, what is this going to cost and how can we bring down the price? Maybe you need to be talking to, somebody in your ministry. We definitely need to be galvanizing to say, how do we advocate for access to these programs so that we get vaginal rings ASAP, we get Tegrova at an affordable price that can get to Uganda, as well as Malawi, Botswana, and South Africa et al. Those three things: deal with what we've got, prepare for what's coming, and advocate that we get it as soon as possible, even in the poorest of our settings. Thanks, Mitchell.
I'm tempted to say meeting adjourned. The four of you and Linda Gale putting the pieces together, just brilliant. I want to come, each of you in different ways talked a bit about the promise of PrEP generally and of the ring and of cabotegravir. I wonder if each of you might want to go a little deeper on this. You, LGB, were one of the investigators on the IPREX trial, which presented its findings 11 and a half years ago. And oral PrEP was approved first by the FDA 10 years ago this year. And we all agree we've gone way too slow. And so what specifically do we need to do with respect to the ring and Cab-LA to make those viable options for people to use? What lessons have we learned, and what specifically do you think we need to do to actually make it real in each of our communities and countries? Anyone can start. Rachel, you've got a great grin and you sit at the World Health Organization. What do we need to do differently this time?
So we really don't want to wait 10 years till we start implementing. So I think, both products, both Cab and the ring are at very different places. We've got the Cab now, has Article 58 approval from the EMA. It's on the WHO pre-qualified list. It's extremely safe. We don't have any concerns about the testing issues or implementation. What we really need for the ring is to learn how to use it. To listen to community voices, and I think it's fantastic, to have Grace here. We need community to ask for this, because I think we were all disappointed that it wasn't going to be considered for American women by FDA, but that's not an issue for women in other settings. And so if this product is going to become available, we really need to understand how women would like this to be delivered, and how we could make this this safe, relatively simple product be available. So we've already got some regulatory approval in countries for the ring. So we really can start with that implementation. For CAB, although regulatory approval has started, we need to really support countries to speed that up. In-country regulation can be very, very slow. And I know, I'm looking at Linda Gale, we've got to work with the regulatory bodies in South Africa and other countries, and other countries out. I know that VIV is looking for regulatory approval in the countries that were part of 084, but and 083, but we've got to go beyond that. I think we've got to make sure the price is right. We don't know the price, but it's got to be equivalent to oral PrEP. We can't have this being an expensive product. What happens in the US, that's up to the US. But for the price for low and middle income countries has to be reasonable. Otherwise, again, it's going to be a non-starter. But we definitely have, Global Fund really excited about funding both the ring and CAB-LA. But most importantly is, of course, the values and preferences from clients and providers. And, we at WHO will be we've already recommended the ring. We will be having our guideline meeting for CAB very soon. And what we are really pressing for is implementation science, to know how to use both the ring and CAB-LA in real world settings. And I know there are some great projects that are dying to get started, funded by UNITAID under the Mosaic project and others. Really, really exciting. We need to get this going, because at the moment we just have the randomized controlled trials. So we need lots and lots of community awareness. I think that's another thing. I think with oral PrEP, every time you listen to communities, you learn something new. And we've just started, as I say, doing some values and preferences work for both projects. Extraordinary different questions are coming out of sex-led communities in India compared with young women in Southern Africa. We have to listen, and we have to engage with communities, see how they would like this provided. There are some implementation issues around testing. We need to sort that out. We're really hopeful this could be something useful in pregnancy and for breastfeeding women, when we know that HIV incidence is high, and we want to offer choices. So a big body of work, and we need to push those who can support some implementation science to get moving, push the regulation, and push on a low price and availability for low and middle income countries.
Fantastic, Rachel. I wonder, you said a couple of things, and I wonder, Grace, if you wanted to comment, because you said something in your introduction about this idea of programming for choice. When you look at it, what is, we've had PrEP introduced slowly in some places, very slowly in the country where you are. What does this programming for choice need to look like? How do we do it?
Thank you so much, Mitchell. But I think before coming to your question, I just wanted to add something quickly on what Rachel was talking about, that as we start looking at the two products that we're talking about, one of the things that is big, I think, in terms of just getting sure that it's done, is starting preliminary conversations at policy level within the countries. I think this is something that we often do late, and it always has implication in terms of making sure that the product is in the hands of the people who need it most. So I think this is something that we really need to already put there on the table and say, can we start having this conversation? Now, going back to the question that you asked me around programming of choice. So for me, when I think about this, it basically means as individuals, as people, we are very different. We've got individual differences in terms of choices, in terms of lifestyles, in terms of our needs, even for HIV prevention. And most importantly, the context that we live in is very different across the globe, regionally. So as a woman, I might want a product that would be discreet, for instance. I want to be that product and that tool to be available for me, because that's my choice. That's what I need. And at the same time, a young woman somewhere might say, maybe this does not work for me. Maybe for me, what I need is a condom. That should be available and accessible to this young woman. So when I look at programming for choice, what I'm looking at is health systems need to be built in a way that responds to the prevention needs of individual people, preferences, but also lifestyles. I don't want to be cornered into using a product because that's the only one there. I want to be able to say, this is the product that I can comfortably use, because in so doing, I can be assured that I'll adhere to it. I'll be able to use it out of the fact that I've chosen it and it works within my lifestyle. So at the end of the day, when I look at this, really, it's about options. It's about making sure that we do have all necessary available tools that are there for prevention, available to people who need it most. I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, fantastic. Ken or LGB, anything you want to add in terms of some things that we should practically be doing now with respect to these products?
Yeah, so the thought that comes to my mind, Mitchell, is that, and I'm thinking about my policymakers. For them, cash is king, right? And I'm seeing a bit of some comments. I think this is the case around the world, including the US, Rachel. So, the decisions about what is put onto EDLs, about what's put into our clinics, are largely driven about what is affordable. So the comments that Grace has just made are absolutely critical, but we know it. We know it better than anyone, but we are here in our echo chamber, right? We have absolutely bought into the important choices king, as far as we're concerned. But the minute you step out of our echo chamber, cash is king. And, we had a lot of trouble even putting PrEP on our, investment case for prevention in South Africa. And we've got a pretty good GDP as things go. So we have to now really start honing our narrative around how this investment is so important. What are we going to gain in terms of infections averted, infections saved? What are we going to gain in terms of fewer people needing lifelong antiretrovirals? What are we going to gain in terms of fewer children being born with HIV with a lifelong, sentence of HIV ahead of them? We need to get that narrative together. And if you like, to be a bit crude, Mitchell, we need to get that stuff together very quickly, in a way that we can do that elevator speech at any time and really start to move our policy makers in that direction. Because I think, the sort of things, I think Rachel's right. What unlocks this is you need the regulatory approval. And once you've got the you need the guidelines. And once you've got the guidelines, you need the product in the clinic. And that is not going to happen unless somebody put that into the budget 2 years ago. So we, today the ministry is budgeting for 2 years down the line. So we have to be really, really on our, on our game here to make sure that we're getting that narrative out there. And every single podium we find ourselves near or on, we need to be sure we are talking that very clearly, and in terms of, dollars and cents, so that it makes sense to them that they make this investment. And so that's, that I think is also preparedness alongside talking, of course, to the users who are ultimately going to benefit from these choice options.
Lydia, I'm so glad you framed it that way, because I think sometimes we do get stuck in these echo chambers, and it doesn't mean in different chambers that choice isn't still important, but balancing that choice and those choice and cash kingdoms, so to speak, and how do we get it right with the different audiences? So good. And actually, Ken, it makes me think, you've been with HEPS and a number of partners really been at the forefront of some of the work related to the investments, not only by national governments, but by PEPFAR and Global Fund at the country level. Do you have some thoughts on what our strategies should be in that kind of budget advocacy realm?
Thanks, Mitchell. That's a great question, and it builds on what Linda was saying, the economic dividends case that we need to demonstrate to our leaders. And I think before I share some thoughts around that, I think political will and mobilizing political support, I think we are learning from COVID that we cannot run away from the politicians, and they have this power, they make things happen. And one of the ways is what Linda is saying, of interesting them in prevention. And to your point, I think being in these spaces, everything I hear all the time is about efficiency. And one, it's demonstrating the economic dividends of investing in prevention versus curative and therapeutic interventions. I think that's an argument that we can take to those spaces that they like to hear a lot is what are they averting? What are they saving in the long term? What is sustainable? I think the conversation now is a lot around sustainability. So and we cannot sustain the epidemic if and this is a common phrase used, if we're not closing the tap. So I think those are some of the arguments that we take to these tables.
Great. There are a number of comments in the chat. I mean, great comments, and we will be capturing all of this in follow-up. But the issue of other options, shorter term, non-systemic methods, as Jim Pickett's raised here, obviously in the midst of the excitement of both RING moving forward with WHO recommendation and CAB's initial regulatory approval, we did get some setbacks in the research world late last year about other methods. And I wonder, maybe, Linda Gale, it may be helpful because this is maybe the first time a lot of people are hearing about this, because that was all happening right about the holidays. Can you give a quick snapshot of what happened, what it means, and what we should all be thinking about in terms of the R&D agenda for 2022?
Right. So Mitchell, you're in particular, I think, referring to three big phase 3 studies, one being long-acting lenacapavir, which is both in men who have sex with men and women who have sex with men, as well as transgender folk and non-binary folk. And then similarly, those populations for the monthly is islatravir pill. Now, both of them hit what I call the pothole. You can think of it as a roadblock, all kinds of other analogies. We in the science world like to really think about this as not as a dead stop, okay? It's not a bailout, throw out. That has not happened. When that happens, that's when the DSMB says, okay, we're going to, like we did with 702 and with 705, we are now going to, unblind the participants. We're going to stop the study for whatever reasons, whether futility or whatever. In this case, in the case of lenacapavir, the study has been put on pause. With islatravir, they have actually been asked to stop enrollment and not enroll anymore. Let me deal with the lenacapavir one first. There it seems to be it's a logistical issue where the vial that the product is vialed in at the moment needs to be changed. There's nothing dangerous about it, but there's just a requirement that a different kind of glassware gets used. Now, people may not be aware, but if you haven't figured it out, with 4.6 billion people having had a dose of vaccines to date, a lot of glass vials have suddenly come into use and need. And so there is a worldwide shortage of glass vials. And so this has been part of the issue. So the Gilead is moving quickly to find alternative glass vials, and hopefully that study will very quickly be back. Both the one happening in men and populations associated will go forward, and then the one happening in women. In terms of islatravir, people may have seen the press release, which showed that, or disclosed that in their treatment, this product is being developed both for treatment and for prevention, like lenacapavir. And in the treatment, which is a different dosing schedule, it was recognized that there was a lymphocyte drop. Now, the lymphocyte is the white cell within your blood, which is a very important cell, helps us fight coronavirus and other things. That took a minor dip. And it led to, first of all, those studies stopping dosing. But when looked at more carefully, it was thought that it was very important to understand the mechanism, because this has come from left field. It's not something that has been recognized associated with this type of antiviral. And up until now, it's had a very clean sort of record, as it were. So nobody has had a serious adverse event or anything. It's a laboratory-based observation at the moment, but I'm sure everybody on this webinar and beyond agree that when we're putting a product into healthy people, we want to be absolutely sure we don't have any kind of harm. So there is a stoppage period for the developer and others to put some time and energy into understanding what possibly this mechanism could be about. So we are hopefully going to move to keeping the sites busy, doing some of the work that Rachel and Grace have been talking about, really getting to understand user use, etc. Whilst we wait and we're thinking of a few other nice strategies to get to the mechanism as quickly as possible so that we can unblock this and move on. So I would just re-echo, this is not a stop to the program. It is a pothole that we are going to navigate around.
Super helpful explanation of all of that. I want to come to one thing. A lot of this was based on decisions or the perspectives of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the U.S. regulator. And obviously, we all think of the FDA, and I sit here in the United States, it is often seen as the gold standard. I wonder if any of you want to talk, whether it's about CAB's approval or a trial being put on pause, should it all be down to the FDA making decisions? And it came up with the vaginal ring, as several of you said. And is there an advocacy agenda that we need to be really thinking about our regulatory agencies more broadly, so that decisions are made in countries, not by one agency as if they speak for all? Any thoughts on what we need to do about regulatory advocacy?
So I would just say that, I think more than anybody else, this region that I sit in and that Grace and Kenneth and Rachel advocates for it at the WHO, HIV itself is incredibly toxic, right? And its side effects are horrible. And so that perspective, I think, Mitchell, is an important one. And that brings a contextual setting that sometimes maybe some of these decisions, and the one that I think resonated with all of us was the Dolly Tegrova argument, right? Where things were put on hold. But when you went to the communities who were grappling the most with living with the virus and having to take antivirals that they didn't want to take, that there was a completely different narrative that came out of that. It's our decision and we get to have a say in this. And by the way, this is more important for us to go down this road. And so again, there you had the conversation happening in the context of the realities of the people in this world. And so I would just say that I do think we need to get to a point where there's equity not only around products and medicine and vaccines, but there should also be equity around regulatory input and say. And this is where I do think, you know, maybe there's some capacity building that needs to happen, etc. I'm not going to, but I do think those voices are very critical to be heard, because there are some very important contextual elements that I think get lost if we don't bring them into the mix.
Really like that. I mean, equity in decision making as much as equity in access. You know, Grace, not to put you totally on the spot, but I will. You've been part of the Trial Design Academy that we've been working with a number of partners to really help advocates engage with the trial designers of some of these newer trials. Is there a body of work that we need to expand and think about that from a regulatory perspective, so that there is that capacity to engage with regulatory agencies? I don't know if you or Ken have thoughts on that.
Sorry, I thought Grace would go first, but
oh, there she is. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, yes. I personally believe as communities, definitely we should have a voice in these regulatory decisions. I know sometimes there's a bit of participation, but I guess also the context should matter. I'll speak from a sub-Saharan Africa perspective, where access to different prevention options also depends on the power relations between among men and women is different. For example, the decision on the ring in the US, I think that shouldn't, ideally it shouldn't be affect decisions here in Africa based on our context, and it should be based on need. It should be based on our own independent approval bodies, basing on their own science and findings. And I don't like it when it's a decision that we are following on the big guys, if you like. Following decisions by the big guys in the in production of these products. I think that these trials also happen in our settings, so it should be based on the findings from these trials, especially that are happening in our settings. And it takes me to the point of negotiation during these trials on how we use this information to adopt these products, given that we're participating in these researches. So it's a tough one to answer, but that's my thought.
Yeah, no, super helpful. Oh, go ahead, Grace.
Yes, thank you so much, Sol. I lost internet for a bit. Just to agree with Kenneth that I think the regulators within our context have a very critical role to play in terms of just looking at the products that are coming in, but even in the future. I think for me, one of the things that we need to be looking at when you look at the question that you posed is also to ask, why would we look at FDA as the gold standard? Because in answering that question, it helps us to build the advocacy case. When we look at FDA, for instance, we need to ask ourselves questions around how responsive are regulators being to the needs and to the production pathway of products. For instance, we need to look at how they are acting with sense of agency. For instance, if they have something that is coming on their table and is taking forever for them to respond to, then that's a problem. So when we look at the regulatory bodies within the context that we work in, I think the advocacy agenda that we have is we need stronger regulatory processes, in terms of structure, in terms of the way they function, because we want to acknowledge their role. It's a very critical role. Without them, we would not be where we are at the moment. So we acknowledge that. But at the same time, we also want them to be very functional, very responsive, and making sure that they understand why we are doing what we're doing. Because at the end of the day, when all is said and done, we do want these products to be with the people who need them, but in the most safe way. So that's where their role is. So for me, really is looking at where are the tipping points for them, and how can we start advocating for those areas to make sure that our regulatory bodies within the regions are also responsive enough the way we want them to be. Thank you so much.
Grace, thank you. And I'm conscious of time. Some great additional questions coming. I do want to just flag Nita Marar's comment that she just put in about, and that is really an area that I think a number of us have been pushing for, that we not only see advocates and communities involved in the protocol designs of trials, as is now fairly standard, but making sure they're involved in the broader areas. And there's a lot of exciting work there. I do want to come to a couple of questions that got put here. Rachel, I see you just answered about FTAF for PrEP and Jim's question. And I don't know if you want to add anything about that from a WHO perspective.
Muted.
Oh, you're muted, Rachel.
Obviously, the trial results showed that FTAF was equivalent effectively to TDF-FTC, and there's a marginal renal safety difference. Although, of course, we've just done a review of the renal safety for TDF-FTC, and particularly in the under 30s, it is extraordinarily safe. We at WHO would have liked to have seen trials that were more inclusive across geographies and populations, to make to invest in having to analyze the data and have a guidelines meeting on that. And so we were really not considering that until that's available. And of course, as time goes on as well, there are potential weight gain issues with FTAF. And particularly at the moment when one's looking at price, we would, although there are indications that generic would be available, we want to make sure that that was really the case across a range of low and middle income countries. So it's not our priority. I was also just interested, and I don't know if this is cheeky of me, to Jim was also saying he doesn't see a health system that could offer injectable PrEP. I think we have to be a bit more open. I think people, certainly from our values and preferences with key population communities, not everyone, of course, wants to have an injectable option. Lots of people are really, really happy with oral PrEP, and we're not looking to replace that. But there are people who find it difficult taking a daily pill, and would like to consider something more frequent, which didn't involve that taking it daily, and also frequent contact with a healthcare worker, if you are a person who needs more support, isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I think Linda Gale will speak to this, people taking oral PrEP, young people, it's probably good to have even a monthly check-in, because there are other issues that they need to have. And certainly giving an injection is not a difficult thing. Nurses do it all the time for contraceptive choices. It's something many cadres of healthcare workers could do and could do in community sites just as well as in clinic sites. So I think I'm much more positive about injectable PrEP, but I do think we have to push. We're not going to know until we really get that out there, and work with communities, work with providers, and see how these choices pan out. And finally, I want to say I was really sad that islatravir has paused, because I do think a once monthly tablet would be a super thing. I mean, I really do think so. I hope there is potential to adjust the dose or whatever, and continue that if it is safer to lower dose, for example, because I think for many people, and also for PEP, a one tablet rather than the 28 days. I think we were really, really excited about that in the pipeline.
That's a great point, Rachel, and I appreciate, Linda Gill, you're flagging that it's a pothole, not a cul-de-sac. It's not the end of the road, because it is potentially still a really important option. I want to, again, conscious of time, I do want to just thinking about oral PrEP. We were talking before the call started. There was a great article that I think many of you may have seen. I'll put in the chat, from Stephanie Nolan in the New York Times just the other day, about the progress in HIV, and mentions particularly PrEP, which I think some people actually look at as, and we hear this from some policymakers and some researchers, that somehow PrEP has failed. And I think that Stephanie really highlights that, in fact, and it gets to your points, all four of you, about hearing from people. For those on the line, you'll know Stephanie did a webinar with us about a previous article she wrote. We're scheduling one with her to follow up on this article, so more to come there. But I do want to come to one other piece that a dear friend and colleague put in the Q&A, and maybe this is for you, Linda Gill. The first 2 years of COVID, of course, were bookended a bit by very disappointing HIV vaccine results. Major trials that you were involved with in leading had disappointing results. That's the nature of research. But yet we see this renaissance of vaccines, the mRNA platform, as well as other vaccines in COVID. What's the best way that you're able to balance the COVID vaccine research, the HIV vaccine research, and all this PrEP research? What's it mean for HIV vaccine research going forward? Oh, and you're on mute.
Thanks, Mitchell. Yeah. I think lots of mixed emotions and feelings. On the one hand, an incredible sense of urgency and frustration, because I think in many ways, and I think others are writing it here, Yanis and others, that COVID shows us what we can do when we throw enough money and enough political will and scientific expertise at something. We can move mountains, right? I mean, it's been extraordinary to see. And it's all, I named each of those ingredients because they were all as important as each other. Large pots of money, political will, and scientific expertise all coming together in the most extraordinary way. Really making miracles. Now, can we take some of those lessons and take them back into the HIV, and I would add TB and malaria world here, to say, can we inject that same kind of energy and enthusiasm? We are hearing Moderna and others are starting to look at mRNA as a possibility, but I think also there is a real need for us to say, how do we re-energize our scientific pipelines and expertise in HIV, and particularly in TB, to say, what can we do to reignite that excitement and enthusiasm? And in a way, we've been shown it can be done. I mean, in our lifetime, it can be done. So I derive both a sense, as I say, of frustration, but also one of incredible hope that if we took some of that energy and put it into this. I mean, Grace, I absolutely agree with you that our regulators need to feel the urgency, but somehow we've lost that sense of urgency. Do you know that in this country, we lose almost as many people from TB as we've lost from COVID? And yet, our death rates are almost the same. Yet, our complacency around TB is just mind-boggling. So how do we ignite that sense of urgency and just a recognition of how we are failing populations by not taking this on at the level that it should. And so, Mitchell, that would be my hope for as we come out, hopefully, or take a breather from COVID at least and learn to live with it, that we don't lose those lessons and bring them squarely back into our HIV and TB and malaria prevention world.
You know, Lydia, it's a beautiful point. And I think about just, you know, even with disappointing results, the lag between a trial result in TB vaccines or HIV vaccines to trigger the next trial. We wait years between a phase 2 result and starting a phase 3 trial. We're seeing that in TB vaccines. We had a positive phase 2B trial, had results 3 years. And the phase 3 trial has not yet begun. And yet in COVID, we saw phase 3 trials beginning on preprints from phase 2B. And I think that's the urgency. Again, I'm not suggesting it would necessarily have gotten us a licensed vaccine for either of those pathogens, but I love what you're saying there. I'm really conscious of time. I want to come to an issue that you all raised at some point at the beginning, as much as throughout, and that is about political will and funding. He's not on the call that I know of. I'll look on the registration list, but actually on a webinar just the other day, we had John Nkengasong, currently the head of the African Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and as many of you, as all of you know, the nominee to be the new head of PEPFAR. If he were on this call, and we'll be sure he gets the recording, what's the message for Dr. Nkengasong as he considers the role of PEPFAR and leadership? What would you tell him if he were sitting here with you? Who'd like to start? A message for John. Don't be shy.
I can start.
Please.
I think for me, I would talk about 4 things quickly because of time. The first one, communities at the center. We still want communities engaged and involved in the way we are building interventions, in the way we are implementing. The second one is we need to make sure that we are building on the gains that we've had. There's so much we've achieved so far, and we need to make sure that we continue to building on those. For instance, I would want to make a case for key population investment. I think we've done some efforts and we've moved quite a lot. Let's build on those efforts and not lose any mileage on that. And I would want to talk about the fact that let's not leave any geographies behind, no population behind. As he's coming in, we want everyone to be reached, everyone to be part of this solving of this issue. And finally, I would want to make an investment case for scale up of oral PrEP, and also to bring in the new methods that are coming in. I would leave it there.
Beautiful 4-part agenda. Others?
I'd like to build on what Grace has said, and I'm so pleased you mentioned key populations, because I do think, you know, if I had a real wish list for the next couple of years, huge progress has been made, and I always look back to the work that AVAC has done and the work that networks in all countries have done over the past decade. We wouldn't be here. I mean, I think it's fantastic that we have programs for MSM, for transgender women, for sex workers, and for people who inject drugs across so many countries, and voices of communities really being very, very powerful. But the political world, there's a disconnect. You know, there are good, excellent small services, but really getting that to scale and really making. We're not going to change laws in the next couple of years, but let's have a public health approach. Let's have you know, an equity approach for key populations, because and you know, PEPFAR does fund great key population programs, but they're not at scale. They're not fully integrated into national programs. I think we've got to make that next step. So key pops would be number 1. Number 2 is really to say, look. John, PEPFAR's done fantastic on prevention. It's really funded almost in its entirety the VMMC program. Please continue. Of course, we must focus on getting other donors and countries, and in South Africa, for example, funds a lot of its own VMMC program. But countries and the global funds also fund that to get that back on track. Same with condoms. We've got to continue funding these other prevention options. And then I think for adolescent girls and young women, the DREAMS program has been great. It's a huge focus on AGYW across Southern and East Africa. But I think we need to make it smarter. And I think we really need to integrate much more effective prevention, including PrEP and sexual reproductive health into that program. Those would be some quick messages, but I just hope he will hit the ground running and really support prevention in a big way.
Beautiful.
Perhaps I'll jump in very quickly because I realize, and I'm going to give Kenneth the last word there, that, what I would say to him, Mitchell, is that I hope he's taken his vitamins and that he must look after himself, because we really are moving into the second chapter of the AIDS story, and it's going to be a tougher one. I would look to his strength, and the strength of our brother John is that he can bring the most extraordinary people into a room and help them all agree with each other. And so to Margaret's point, I think what we need to assure him of is we have his back. He has allies here on the ground. We are all supportive of him, but he needs to bring some new partners into the mix as well. And of course, never forget the community itself, who are his strongest champions and advocates in this. And to that, Rachel, I would add one more. Don't forget CBOs and on the ground people who have brought us thus far in this HIV epidemic. It actually, PEPFAR has been really important, but it's been the CBOs that have got us to this point. And so really just to remember them as well.
Beautiful point. Kenneth.
Yes. Building on what my colleagues have said, one is people-centered programming, but to me, it's how we would leverage on his experience, his networks, and again on the PEPFAR weight to sustain this urgency and precision we've learned from COVID, to use that and mobilize political will and sustain this urgency with exciting news in the pipeline of those products that are long-term, that are different options, and keep people focused and their eyes and ears alert on what's coming out and rapidly rolling it out with the same urgency we've had in the COVID response.
That is beautiful. And you all, if someone asked me that question, I have a new answer. And my recommendation, Ambassador Nkengasong, would be to appoint the 4 of these people as your ambassadors. What each of you have said is really the agenda for, not just for PEPFAR, not just for future Ambassador Nkengasong, but for the Global Fund, for national governments, for all of us. And throughout all of the comments you all have made, I'm reminded time and time again that we design these products around the pathogen. That's the science of developing a vaccine or an antiretroviral. But we have to design the programs around the people. And I think that's where we have failed. What I heard from each of you in the course of the last hour is that centering of community, that moving in a different way programmatically and not being stuck with the policies and the provider biases that have so often impeded our progress and working and designing around the people. There is so much more to talk about. I saw Kate, your question, we will definitely post to this chat. There are many questions we didn't get to, and great apologies for that, but actually no apologies for kicking off the year with the 4 of you. I really can't think of 4 other people to help frame all that's been done and all that is left to do. And maybe just, I know we're past the hour, but maybe I'll just ask you each if you have a single sentence takeaway for today and for the year ahead. We can go in reverse order this time. I think Linda Gale, go ahead.
Go out and prevent.
Love it. And now I can't remember who was, I think Ken.
Choices, choices, choices.
Beautiful. Grace.
Let's run and move with prevention.
And Rachel.
Equity and access.
Brilliant. Just brilliant, all of you. We have exhausted the hour, but we've not yet even begun to exhaust the work ahead. I look forward to standing in arms with all of you virtually for the time being, hopefully in real life soon, with all of you in the audience. Thank you, and stay safe and stay well, stay rested, and stay strong, because we have lots of potholes to run through and around. As we make this happen, and be in touch for other questions, issues we need to address, and really looking forward to great opportunities together. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers all.